Have you ever felt like you're being watched? Like someone is out to get you? Everywhere you go, you see that same face like you're being followed. That same clean jaw, the same charcoal overcoat, the same expression that belonged to someone who never seems to be surprised by anything. Amara had counted 3 times. 3 Pojangmaka tents, 2 subway stations, and a rooftop bar in Itaewon, and the same man had been in every single one of them. That same man. The restaurant she was in tonight was the kind of place that existed in Seoul to make people feel quietly important. Low lighting, tiny plates, everybody looking deliberately at nobody. Amara had chosen it precisely because she was invisible in this city, a Nigerian architect on a 2-week contract, fresh off a plane from Lagos with a rolling suitcase and 0 history in Korea. There was no reason, none at all, for anyone to follow her. And yet, he was 2 tables away, not looking at her, which somehow felt more deliberate than staring. She finished her glass of water, stood up, and walked directly to his table. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down the way you sit when you've already decided the conversation is happening whether he likes it or not. He looked up slowly. "You were outside the Hongdae exit on Monday," she said, keeping her voice even. "You were at the street market in Mapo on Tuesday. And you are sitting 2 tables from me right now in this restaurant that I only chose an hour ago. So, I need you to tell me why." He didn't flinch, didn't apologize. He looked at her the way someone looks at a document they've already read twice and said, "You were never meant to see the package." Amara stared at him. What package? His phone buzzed on the table. Something shifted behind his eyes, quick, controlled. He stood up, placed a small card beside her water glass, and walked out of the restaurant without once looking back. She picked up the card. No name, no number, just an address in Bukshan. And below it, 4 words in clean print. "Do not go back." She sat at his table for a full minute. Then she put the card in her jacket pocket. That was the first mistake. Outside, Seoul was doing exactly what Seoul does after dark, glittering and aggressive and alive in a way that felt like a dare. The Han River sat somewhere beyond the neon, and the smell of tteokbokki and cold wind moved together through the narrow streets of Seoul like they'd always belonged to each other. Amara stood on the pavement and told herself she was only going to look. She was a structural engineer by training, an architect by title, a woman who believed in load-bearing walls and measurable outcomes. A man leaving a cryptic card and vanishing into a Seoul night was not a measurable outcome. And yet her feet were already moving. The address was in Bukshan Hanok Village, the kind of street that looked like it had refused to enter the 21st century and was doing perfectly fine about it. Old tiled rooftops pressed together between concrete walls, a convenience store with a flickering sign, and a building on the corner. 4 floors, no signage, 1 lit window on the 2nd floor. She pressed the buzzer. Nothing for so long she nearly left. Then the door clicked open. The stairwell smelled like cedar and something chemical underneath it. The 2nd floor had 1 door, slightly ajar, warm light leaking through. She pushed it open. He was standing by the window, coat still on, a glass in his hand, watching the alley below with the stillness of someone who had made a career out of watching alleys. The room was nearly empty. A table, 2 chairs, a laptop, and on the table, a brown envelope with her name written on it in handwriting she recognized immediately and completely. Her mother's handwriting. Amara stopped breathing for a full second. "How do you have that?" He turned from the window. Set down the glass. "My name is Ryo Songjin," he said. "And your mother came to Seoul 7 months ago." He spoke carefully, precisely, the way someone speaks when they've rehearsed, not the words, but the weight they need the words to carry. He told her that her mother had met with a man named Choi Byung-go. That Choi Byung-go was the reason she came. That he was also the reason she had left very quickly, without telling anyone she had been here at all. "Sit down, Amara," Ryo said, nodding at the chair. "There is something you do not know about the project that brought you to this city." She didn't sit immediately. She stood in that doorway and took stock of everything, the envelope with her mother's handwriting, the man who had followed her for 3 days, the city of Seoul humming 12 meters below a window she hadn't planned to be standing near. Then she sat.
Before we go further, if you're finding this story worth your time, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us keep producing work like this. Thank you.
Rio didn't open the envelope. He sat across from her and laced his fingers on the table and asked her something she wasn't expecting. The firm that contracted you, how did they reach you? Through my agency, Amara said. A referral. Someone who had seen my portfolio. Do you know who referred you? He said immediately, like he had an answer he was expecting from her.
She paused.
She actually didn't. Her agent had said it was someone in the industry, a contact, the usual language that meant nothing specific. She had not pushed. In her field, work came through relationships, and she had learned not to interrogate good fortune. No, she admitted. Rio nodded slowly, confirming something he'd already known. The firm is a shell, he said. The building in Seongbuk-dong is real. The contract is real. But the reason they needed a foreign architect, specifically someone with no ties to Korea, no family history here, no local connections, had nothing to do with design. Something cold moved through Amara's chest. The site sits above something that was concealed 20 years ago, Rio continued. Choi Byung-go concealed it. And the people who want it recovered needed someone who would excavate without understanding they were excavating. What is buried there? I don't know precisely. He met her eyes. But your mother found a document. Something that tells you what to look for. Something Choi Byung-go has no idea she found. Amara opened the envelope. Inside, one folded page in her mother's handwriting and a photograph. The photograph was old, printed on glossy 90s paper, the kind that aged slightly yellow at the edges. Two men standing in front of a demolished building in what looked like a construction site. One of them, she didn't recognize. The other one made her go completely still. She had seen his face before. Not in person, in a framed photograph behind the desk of Director Lim, the head of the firm that had hired her. The man who had shaken her hand on her first morning in Seoul and said, in excellent English, "We're so pleased you're here." She turned the photograph over. 5 words read on the back, in her mother's careful script. He knows what you carry. Amara set the photograph down. Outside the window, the rooftops of Bukshan were dark and still. She thought about Director Lim's handshake. She thought about the foundation blueprints she'd already been given. She thought about the 3 separate times in 5 days that she'd been asked to revise the structural core placement, each time with smiles, each time with vague language about aesthetic priorities and the client's sensitivity to the northern face of the site. They've been steering my designs, she said quietly. Every revision moved the structural core further northeast. I thought they were being fussy. They were moving me toward something. Rio leaned forward slightly, or away from something, depending on the direction. She got a little lost in his eyes, then immediately got a hold of herself and the seriousness of her situation. She replayed every revision. The core had moved northeast consistently, away from the most structurally logical position, toward the older section of the site, toward an area she had noted in her own survey as having slightly unusual soil density readings that she had chalked up to old fill material. Old fill material. I need to see the original site survey, she said. The one that existed before they commissioned mine. Rio's phone buzzed. He checked it. For the first time that evening, something moved in his expression that wasn't entirely controlled. We need to move, he said, already standing. There's a car outside that wasn't there 10 minutes ago. Amara turned toward the window without thinking. Fascinated by the man, she was following his lead. The alley below looked quiet. But at the far end, just past where the streetlight died, a black SUV sat with its engine off and the faint orange glow of a cigarette visible through the driver's window. I need you to trust me for the next 5 hours, Rio said, picking up the envelope and handing it back to her. After that, you can do whatever you want. I don't know you, Amara said. But she was already standing.
No.
But your mother did. He said, looking at her. He realized he had never really looked at her properly. Her hair, the innocence in her face, the fear that had her looking vulnerable, her dark brown eyes. Let's move, he said as he snapped back to reality. They went out through the back, down a service staircase, so narrow her elbows brushed the walls, and into an alley that smelled like rain and old drains, and Amara did not look back even though every reasonable instinct she had was pointing in the other direction. Rio moved through Seoul's backstreets the way water moves through a city it has known for decades, without hesitation, always finding the route that wasn't obvious. He flagged a taxi on a side road 2 blocks from Bukshin, gave an address she didn't catch, and they rode in silence through the lit sprawl of the city, while Amara held the envelope on her lap and watched him watch the rear window. "Are we being followed?" she asked. "Not yet," he affirmed. They ended up at a Pojangmaka tent near the river. Plastic chairs, a gas burner, an Ajiasi behind the counter who looked at Rio with a particular kind of recognition that meant he knew better than to show it. 2 bowls of sundubu jjigae arrived without being ordered. Amara wrapped both hands around hers and looked at Rio across the narrow table.
"Start from the beginning," she said. So he did.
His name was Rio Songjin. He said simply, someone who occupied a specific position in the parts of Seoul that didn't appear in any tourism map, the connective tissue between power and its shadow, between what was decided in glass boardrooms and what was carried out in buildings without signage. He had a network. He had information. He had a history with Choi Byung-go that stretched back 18 years and had begun as business and collapsed into something far more complicated. Choi Byung-go, he explained, had spent the better part of 2 decades acquiring land across 4 districts of Seoul through a series of legal maneuvers that displaced old families, small traders, and community institutions. One of those institutions had been a cultural arts cooperative that had operated on a corner in Seongbuk-dong since 1989. A space that had been built by a man who had come to Seoul from Nigeria in the late 1980s, built something real there, and had it taken from him through the kind of legal violence that leaves no visible marks. When Choi buried what he buried 20 years ago, he had concealed it beneath the foundation of a building that was later demolished. Now that site was being redeveloped, and whatever was underneath it had become worth more to certain people than anything going up above ground. "My father," Amara said. It wasn't a question. Rio looked at her steadily. "For 9 years before you were born, he built something in Seongbuk-dong. Choi Byung-go took it. Whatever is buried under that site, your mother believed it belonged to your father's family." "Which means it belongs to me," Amara said. They sat with that for a moment. Then she asked the question she'd been holding since the restaurant. "Why are you doing this? My mother trusted you, fine. But why does this matter to you personally? What is Choi Byung-go to you?" Rio was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Then he used me. 15 years ago. I did something for him that I didn't fully understand until it was already done. By the time I understood what I'd helped him bury, not literally, it was finished. I've been waiting for a specific kind of opportunity to correct it." He paused. "Your mother came to me with information I didn't have. We made an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "I protect you. You give me access to the site. I help you recover what was your father's. And I get Choi Byung-go." The river moved outside the tent, enormous and indifferent. Amara thought about the structural core. She thought about soil density readings. She thought about the fact that she had spent her entire career understanding how things hold together, and more specifically, what happens when you remove the right support in the right place. "I need the original site survey," she said. "And I need access to the Seongbuk-dong building within 48 hours, before they realize how much I know." "I can get you both," Rio said with confidence like she had never seen before. "Then we have a deal." She extended her hand across the plastic table. He looked at it for a moment, something in his expression moving toward a name it hadn't found yet, and then he took it. One firm shake. The kind that means something has been set in motion that neither of them could now take back. Rio brought her to a house in Seoul, behind a garden wall, the kind of home that communicated old money and a preference for not being found. A woman let them in, somewhere in her 50s, sharp eyes, 3 silver rings on one hand, and disappeared into another room without a word. Rio gave Amara a phone. Not her own. "Don't use your personal phone for anything," he said. "Email, calls, nothing. They've been monitoring it since before you landed." Amara thought about the calls she had made from her hotel. Her mother. Her best friend in Abuja she had complained to about the humidity. Her agent. A quiet, thorough violation moved through her. "They don't know what I know yet," she said. "Someone saw you approach me in the restaurant tonight," Rio said. "They don't know what I told you. which makes you more dangerous to them now than you were this morning. I was just an architect 12 hours ago. You were never just an architect, he said. You were chosen because of whose daughter you are. They pulled you here because of your name. They just didn't account for the fact that you'd pull back. She almost laughed. The tension in her chest had been building for hours, and suddenly it needed somewhere to go. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Then she looked at Rio properly, past the composure, past the dark coat, past the particular quality of stillness that a man develops when he has spent years in rooms where the wrong movement costs too much. She saw that he was tired, that this wasn't just strategy for him, that whatever sat between him and Choi Byung-go was older than any agreement he'd made with her mother and had not finished costing him yet. In 36 hours, she would be inside the Seongbuk-dong building with the original survey in her hands. She would know exactly what her designs had been quietly guided toward, and she would be the one holding the map. What she did not know, what she could not have known, sitting in that quiet room in Seoul with the borrowed phone in her hand and the envelope in her lap, was that the sharp-eyed woman who had let them through the door was at that exact moment in another room, holding a second phone, typing a single message. The message went to a number Amara would have recognized. Director Lim's direct line. It said, "She knows. And she's with him."
If you found this story worth your time, subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep producing work like this. Thank you.